Episode 1. This story begins with a hellish lord. Himself, he was powerful in every way: swordsmanship, street smarts, magic, military tactics. And anyway, so much so, in fact, that he couldn't help but use his limitless power for other things, like the invasion of the human realm. The 6 gods, to end the tyranny of the infernal lord, granted humans a blessing to defend themselves against him, in the form of such a warrior, who only appears once every 100 years in an arsenal of sacred weapons. At the number 1 gate of the infernal lord's castle was El, a huge dragon, resting on the ground with a carefree and bored attitude ordering a pizza. This was the first of the 4 guardians of the infernal lord's army, who was waiting for 7 years to be able to face the warrior. Suddenly, without prior warning, 4 characters appear before him, the youngest of the group being the one who speaks and, exclaiming defiantly with a sword on his back, asks if this was the first guardian. The tedious wait was finally over. The warrior had arisen before his eyes. El excited, he responds with a smile on his face, and taking the spear from him, he declares a certain death sentence for the warrior. Next to the warrior lay a middle-aged man with a patch over his right eye, which indicates his intention to attack El from behind. A fat monk and a woman with magical abilities also expressed their support for the young warrior they were accompanying. With the tension palpable in the air, El confirms his suspicion. The legendary warrior was totally harmless, and it's not like he just hid his power to appear weaker. And yet, this one did not intend to contain himself. The warrior, recognizing the strength of his opponent, declares that she is no match for him and, taking his sword, launches his shooting star attack, making use of all his power. El, seizing his weapon, counterattacks with his rising spear, engulfing both of them in a dazzling, blinding explosion. When the intense residual glow of the explosion ceases, both El and the monk and the woman are astonished to see the young warrior lying with his back leaning against a tree, totally motionless, since in reality he was dead. Since during the explosion the warrior's sword had flown off, remaining stuck in the same tree where his inert body lay reclining, revealing the camouflage that until now had kept Jack hidden, the man with the patch, who was waiting for his opportunity to attack the guardian. However, he could no longer do so because he had been nailed by the sword in a vital point. With his last strength, he took a flask from his belt containing the deadly venom of the human-faced serpent, and, emptying it onto his dagger, prepared one last venomous darkness attack. Without listening to the monk's plea to stop so he could heal him with his powers, Jack threw the dagger without further ado in the guardian's direction, at the same time that the monk invoked the light, appearing a blinding glare that diverted the trajectory of the dagger, which in the end ended up impacting directly on the forehead of the monk, who was standing a few meters behind El, and from whose body only his bones and clothing remained. Jack, realizing it, blamed what happened to the monk on El's cunning, and died. The 4 infernal guardians had a very important mission, given by Tyne, advisor to the infernal lord, that of facing the warrior, and dying in the fight, since the infernal lord wanted to face stronger opponents at his whim. Their function was to be sacrifices to give experience and items to the warrior and his group, and once dead, they would receive benefits, a generous reward. They could retire and spend the afterlife in the hellish paradise. Thinking about all this, the guardian, frustrated by the weakness of the warrior, and very angry, approached his inert body with a firm step, took him tightly in his hands and, desperate, began to yell at him and shake him for ruining the retirement plan of he, accidentally digging its claws into the body. The woman, stunned and terrified by the events, succumbed to the power of the guardian and begged for her life, to the point of blackmailing him into letting her live for the sake of her son, confessing that she was pregnant. El, fed up with so much incompetence, he approached her threateningly, deciding that it would be a waste of her to kill her, since if there was no warrior who could kill him, he would raise one of hers, he thought to himself. And standing before the woman, he asks her to let him raise her child. Episode 2. After a long and awkward silence over pizza, El continued to beg Lafi, the female magician, to allow her to raise her baby. She, trembling and indecisive, tells him that it was very difficult for her to let her son be raised by the dragon that killed her father. Could an enemy raise his baby? Well, she did not raise him, because the baby was the son of the warrior and, although she was scared, she spoke very sincerely. With this shocking and revealing news, El insisted and begged even more vehemently to be allowed to raise him, claiming that the human kingdom needed a warrior to save it from being destroyed since there were many things worth saving, such as pizza. Trying to hide his true goal of raising a strong warrior to kill him. The more he listened to him speak, Lafi knew that if she entrusted her baby to him, something terrible would happen. and in search of a way for both of them to survive, she very cunningly, making use of her abilities, declared with a feigned sadness in her eyes that it would be better if the baby were not born, since her pregnancy had been the result of an affair. One night, and when the news broke that she was pregnant, not even the Guerrero de Crap that turns out was the biological father of the child who refused to take responsibility for it, nor her uncle Jack the thief, who said that such banalities did not interest him, nor even the monk Mumyo. None of them were happy for her. Therefore she refused to allow a baby that had not been well received also be loaded with a life filled with chaos and strife. Next, she took the fork she was eating with, raised it, and, dramatically and feignedly, she lowered it towards her belly, but it really ended up hitting the plate of salad she was eating. On the other hand, Elle, with a terrified look, let out a cry of despair, begging her to stop, begging on her knees before her and with tears in her eyes that he would do anything as long as she didn't hurt the baby because she hurt him. It was very important. He needed a warrior, he needed that baby. And, not realizing the difference between them, between a guardian of the Infernal Lord's army with no street smarts, who lived as a hermit for 7 years waiting for the warrior, and an average mage who had been working on her own in the kingdom for years, human and who had overcome all kinds of tests and adversities, they changed roles. Lafi was on her feet and Elle knelt at her feet pleading. There was an almost unbridgeable gap in negotiating skills, and it was obvious. Faced with this change in situation, and upon hearing what she wanted, Lafi, with a victorious smile on her lips, presented a contract for the custody of the baby before Elle, which she had to sign. The same, he was perplexed, because he did not want to go so far. But it was either this or nothing, because Lafi wouldn't let him just be his teacher and brag to everyone that he practically raised him, while she would have to educate him, take care of him, do the housework and look for bread. If that was the level of responsibility he was willing to take on as a Hell Guardian, it was unacceptable to her. Offended, seeing that her resolve had been questioned, Elle recovered from his moment of weakness and with a firm determination, claiming to be one of the 4 infernal guardians, ignoring his instinct that told him not to, he signed the contract without even reading it. Suddenly, on the back of his hand, smoke began to sprout which, when it dissipated, revealed a circular mark with some particular symbols, in the center of which it said that his owner was Lafi. He had been totally deceived by the magician Lafi. It was a family contract. Lafi would let him raise her baby, but not alone, they would do it together. The contract was an insurance policy. As the months go by, in a small house in the woods, the voice of Lafi, who was going to work, is heard, giving instructions to Elle, who stays at home taking care of little Dino, who had inherited his father's brown hair and his mother's beautiful eyes. He was a guardian of the Infernal Lord's army, master of the spear, guardian of hell, invincible guardian, and a guardian with unbelievable ability to change diapers. Episode 3. Inside the small house in the forest is Elle, acknowledging that raising a warrior is not an easy task, starting with the fact that humans are very fragile, so he had to sacrifice his body by cutting his claws to avoid so harm the baby Dino. In the middle of the night, an exhausted Elle collapses on his bed, hoping to finally get some sleep. His fantasy is immediately interrupted by Dino's crying, so he gets up to attend to him. Later, in an attempt to teach Dino a neck attack technique, using a mop as a weapon, the guardian is hit on the head by Lafi, who clarifies that the baby still can't walk and doesn't want him to teach him strange things, beginning a long scolding on her part towards him. Elle, totally unhappy about the situation, remembering how unpleasant and unnecessary the presence of Lafi seems to her to raise the child and wanting him to shut up, she reproaches him with disdain that it is early learning, and taking Dino in her hands, raising him high, she declares very calmly and happily, "You should learn all that fast so you can be able to kill him." Shocked and very upset by such a statement, the woman raises her right hand, showing on the back of it the same mark that appeared on Elle's hand when she signed the contract, and with an exclamation, she activates the family control, a technique through which the owner, that is to say Lafi, can give the familiar 3 orders a day, in this case Elle, forbidding him to say the word kill. Lafi well recognizes how useful Elle's help has been in raising Dino, but also how worrying it would have been to have left him to raise his son alone. A little later, they both went to put Dino to bed when he finally fell asleep, and while they tucked him in, each one reflects that raising a child and raising a warrior is not an easy task. They watch him carefully and, noticing how cute and adorable he is, he comforts them and they both give him a tender smile, enjoying the moment. "We need money," Lafi told Elle, as the savings she told him she had been mostly depleted sooner than she calculated due to a certain guardian eating more than she thought. However, before she could finish speaking, Elle hid that the formula Dino was taking was very expensive, provoking the woman's anger. The worried guardian, thinking about what she just told him, dares to ask him how much money he has left and how long it will last them. Lafi, in response, raises his arm and extends his index finger. 1 month, Elle asks with concern and amazement. 1 week, she clarifies. Episode 4. 88 years, 2 months and 3 days have passed since the birth of the Infernal Lord. That means there are only 11 years, 9 months and 27 days left until he awakens. Inside the home in the forest, an arduous discussion about work was taking place. Elle flatly and very loudly refused to work before Lafi, considering it petty work which he had no responsibility to do, because it had been her fault for having to leave the castle of the Infernal Lord with her. Family control. Shut up, Lafi activated, taking command of the discussion. Now it was her turn to yell, claiming that the meat that was eaten was not free, that she should not minimize honest work since, to Elle's relief, she was the one who was going to work because no one would hire him. After all, he was a dragon. They could only hire him as a mascot for a food chain or something. And besides, she couldn't do superior spells like shapeshifter either. Therefore, much to her regret, he had to take care of Dino. Their discussion was interrupted by crying. Dino, who was previously playing happily on the floor with balls of wool dressed in dinosaur pajamas, became entangled in the strands of threads. While Lafi comforted and unraveled Dino, Elle, realizing that this would be the perfect opportunity to train Dino and teach him all the fighting techniques of the Sons of the Dragon without Lafi's interference, she agreed to take care of the boy while Lafi worked with a sly, smiling expression on her face. In the Kingdom Town, while Lafi was walking to her job interview, she couldn't help worrying about Dino because it was the first time she had left him alone with Elle, and trying to calm down, she repeated that he had changed and that she trusted him. However, his mistrust and concern deepened when he saw a group of women buying balls of wool to knit their babies' sweaters, remembering the previous situation at home, wondering if Dino was okay, even though it had only been 3 minutes since he left home, and as he was walking near a flowering tree, he began to sneeze. His allergy had returned. At home, Elle, trying to demonstrate to Dino the rising spear, one of the techniques of the Sons of the Dragon, crashed the mop that he used as a spear with the ceiling. There wasn't enough room inside, so they'd do a class outside, he concluded. Episode 5. In Dr. Magiscal's Guild of Magicians, there was a trembling and very worried Lafi waiting her turn for the job interview, the last one in fact. The first interview was in an astrology guild. However, the relationship that her interviewer had as mother and son with her pet parrot, which talked and was asking her mommy for food, made her remember that Dino was he had hung by the leg with his sobbing eyes before leaving home. She couldn't help but wonder if her Dino would be okay. And she, tearing up, unable to bear her anguish any longer, she jumped out of the window of the tower of the astrology center, leaving behind a frightened woman screaming her name and as a gift from her, a small wound on her cheek. The second was in a guild of magical muscle men. As she tried to relax and stop worrying about Dino, without clearly succeeding, applicant number 32 was heard to be called. She had been called. As she walked in introducing herself as Lafi Hurant, she was interrupted by a muscular man with big arms who was serving coffee which she offered him. Lafi grateful, she gladly accepted the offer. However, the man placed the cup on the table with such force that it broke into pieces, leaving Lafi shocked by such brutality. Apologizing to her, the man explained that he had been studying magic to increase her strength, which he still couldn't control. And without realizing it, she was already remembering Elle with the corpse of the warrior in her hands. Falling into despair, she ran away screaming, thus abandoning the interview. As she mentally prepared herself to enter her last interview, her last opportunity, she kept repeating to herself that Elle would never do anything bad to Dino. After all, she had been taking care of him for more than a year. Standing up, walking towards the door of the interview room, Lafi reminded herself that her work experience had stalled because of the pregnancy. That was the only guild that could hire her, so she had to pass that interview and get a job. Entering, she was blinded by a glare, and as her eyes adjusted to the bright light, she thought she was being tricked. Monk Mumyo, Lafi asked out loud, very surprised. She had been confused. Joseph Gonzalez Guerrero, her superior magician, was the bald man who was sitting at the desk in front of her. Seeing Joseph's impatient face, in a desperate attempt, Lafi tried to apologize to him using not very fluent words. Telling her to excuse her, is that she had been shocked with her hairstyle. The magician, with obvious displeasure and annoyance on her face, declared that she had 10 points less in the interview, which hadn't started yet. Meanwhile, Elle was running at full speed through the woods from her mountain house with Dino wrapped in a blanket in his arms with a bad cough, runny nose, and high fever. Although he had tried the usual, changing her diaper and giving her a pacifier, it was still the same. Stopping abruptly, he realized that Dino was sick. Not knowing what to do, he tried to find a solution, thinking about his childhood, remembering the time he spent training with his two brothers. It was useless. He never remembers getting sick. For the first time, I wish Lafi was there, she would know what to do. Annoyed with himself for having softened for a moment, he reminded himself that he was El, a custodian of hell, invincible guardian, master of the spear, guardian of the infernal lord's army. And yet, with tears in his eyes, he cried out with all his might for someone to help him. The scream reached the ears of a stout, hooded lady with a scar on her left eye, who was nearby in the forest armed with a bow and arrows next to a corpse. Episode 6. Even running through the forest on the mountain, El wonders where he was going because he never left home so that humans would not see him. Suddenly, his sharp instincts are activated when he realizes that he is being attacked. He perceives an arrow approaching at full speed in the direction of his head, which he skillfully manages to dodge, which stuck into a tree that was completely destroyed by the impact. Surprising the guardian, the hooded lady with the scar on her eye appears out of nowhere, lunging at El and attacking him. But she stops short as she notices the baby crying in the arms of the huge beast that was only protecting him from her attacks. While El was worried that she was the woman was an unwelcome demon hunter, the lady asks him what she was carrying in her arms, to which he replies that a baby, which was very sick. Surprised that the huge beast could speak, the woman turned and began to walk away from them. But seeing that they were not following her, she stopped abruptly and ordered them to, which El immediately obeyed. In Wizard Joseph's office, he was telling Lafi about her great abilities, which she wasn't listening to because she was too distracted looking at the wizard's shiny bald head that reminded her of the monk Mumyong so much. The man, already underestimating Lafi, asks her specialty in magic, to which she awkwardly replies that it was healing magic. The magician kept talking and explaining things to her, but Lafi was very distracted wondering nonsense about her bald head. Already with very little patience, the man asks Lafi to give him a demonstration to measure the strength of her healing magic, making a cut in the palm of her hand with a knife, to which she accepted. Lafi couldn't take any longer the intense look that the magician was giving her that reminded her even more of the monk Munyo, and in her despair, she cast a spell. But what the magician thought was healing magic ended up in something totally different. Out of nowhere, Joseph the wizard began to feel intense, sweltering heat, but there was no healing effect on his hand. However, as he raised his hand to his head, confused by the sweltering heat, he realized something that made him very angry. Episode 7. During the walk through the forest, El, with Dino in his arms, wondered with some concern where the hooded lady was taking them, who had not answered a single one of his questions, completely ignoring them, concentrating on the path, and dragging the carcass of the prey he had hunted. On the way, El was finally able to recognize where he was. It was close to his house, which they passed on one side, and, a little further on, he caught a glimpse of another house, which he had no idea was there, which they entered with the women. Inside the house there were numerous weapons, and hanging on the wall like trophies, heads of numerous creatures, including a dragon. The lady asks to see the baby, and the lady, who had been with a serious and terrifying expression all the time, he smiled disturbingly at the baby's pouting. She proceeded to wipe his tears and snot with the blanket, and giving El a serious and intense look who was worried about Dino's health, he told him that he was an idiot. Dino had a pollen allergy, and he had been running through the woods with the baby in his arms instead of going home where he would have recovered immediately. The woman scolded. She then let him know that with a bath and a good rest Dino would be fine. El, very relieved, on the verge of tears, bowed thanking the woman, renewing her hope for a carefree death. Hours later, at night, Lafi arrives dragging his feet from exhaustion through the house, surprised that she was so quiet and worried that something bad had happened to Dino. Instantly, to Lafi's relief, El appears before her eyes, gesturing for her to be quiet. Relieved, she sits down and leans against the wall, falling asleep immediately without giving El a chance to ask her how she did in her interview or to tell her what happened with Dino. The next day, Lafi is woken up by all the noise El was making in the kitchen preparing food. Lafi's expression of surprise immediately turned into one of suspicion, as this gesture of kindness was unusual for El, so he proceeded to ask if he had done something wrong, which El energetically denied, very nervous, deciding that it was better not to tell him anything about what happened the day before with Dino. "You're never that dynamic in the morning," Lafi exclaimed, leaving El confused. It was lunch. Realizing this, Lafi nervously tells him that she had gotten a job and that was her first day at work. But there was a detail: she went to work at 11:30 a.m., and it was already 12:30. He was already an hour late. El, who had been staring at her in silence after her confession, exclaimed in a loud voice for her to get up from her and hurry up. Episode 8. It was already late. There was nothing that could be done, Lafi exclaimed while Elle carried her with one arm, and in the other she had Dino heading towards the house of the lady with the scar on her eye. Lafi was confused. To begin with, she didn't know that there was another house behind hers. Elle knocked on the door of the house, and opening it, the woman with the scar showed her face, distrustful of her, asking who she was, revealing the enormous weapon that she had in her hand, and seeing that it was Elle, she told her. Released. He asked her if she could take care of Dino for a moment. She accepted and took Dino in her arms. Lafi hysterical. She did not understand the situation. She did not know who this fearsome and rough-looking lady was or why she should have been entrusted to Dino, flatly refusing that, demanding an explanation. However, Elle, dodging her question, took her by the waist. He spread his wings and flew swiftly into the sky. Lafi screaming in her arms, she had her eyes closed. When she opened them she was amazed at the beautiful landscape in the heights. Where is she? Elle asks her, taking her out of her astonishment. She points indicating the direction of the guild, and they head there at full speed. Lafi worried that someone would see Elle. She casts an invisibility spell on him with her light magic, one of her specialties. Upon landing on the roof of the guild, Lafi could not help but vomit, and she warned Elle that he better explain what happened later. He agreed and flew away at full speed, running away. Behind Lafi, the magician Joseph magically emerged from a swirl of light, who had felt a threatening force in that area and had gone to check, finding Lafi, who was uneasy when she saw him, knowing that, picky as he would scold her for being late and fire her for sure, she thought to herself. Very smiling, the magician Joseph tells him not to worry and to try to be more punctual, telling him to go to work. They enter the department of special cures, which was created especially for Lafi by Joseph, where a group of people were waiting for her. Bald people looking at her with hope on their faces. After being cured of baldness by Lafi, Joseph was extremely grateful to him and hoped that with his great talent he could help cure many people who suffered from this terrible condition that was baldness. Lafi, a mage who dreamed of using her incredible abilities wherever they were needed, found herself healing bald heads, and Elle, one of the Infernal Lord's guardians, who was now dedicated to raising a child with a magician. Undoubtedly, that was not what they had in mind when they became a mage and a guardian of the Infernal Lord. In the dead of night, there was a shadowy-looking mysterious character wrapped in a cloak with a staff, and a strange creature next to him which he carried like a pet on his leash. And, exclaiming a curse directed at Elle, he watched intently from the top of a mountain in the vicinity of the house, at Lafi and Elle who were playing with Dino, a flame of anger appearing in his eyes. Episode 9. In the middle of the forest, the lady with the scar on the eye was walking in the direction of Lafi and Elle's house, carrying on her shoulders a huge tiger bear that she had married. In her path, she stopped abruptly, and leaning down, picked up a small branch and flung it hard in the direction of a tree, impacting it ferociously. She thought that she was too restless, because she thought she had perceived something in that diction. Picking up her prey, she continued on her way, and upon arrival, she deposited the huge bear at the entrance of the Dragon Mage duo's house. The strange phenomenon had started a few days ago. The day after Lafi's first day at work, when she was leaving the house, she found a dead rabbit in the driveway. Happy with the protein-rich prey, they prepared a rabbit stew. But later, the following days, they continued to leave gifts at the entrance of the house every day. From a deer to a demonic boar from the mountains of the Infernal Lord. After a week, Elle and Lafi no longer had refrigerated boxes to store so much food, not to mention the amount of animal skins they had. While they finished accommodating the refrigeration boxes, exhausted from so much work, Lafi opens the door, finding the tiger bear that the lady with the scar had hunted and left there. Trying to be optimistic, Elle proposes to make a broth with the bear and declares that its skin is worth a lot in the market. However, Lafi did not agree. He could not stand the situation anymore, so she went exasperated to the house of her neighbor, the lady with the scar. When the door opened, he revealed the face with a withering look of the neighbor with the fearsome appearance of Lafi. She is already sorry. She decides that it was a mistake to have gone, and she proceeds to leave, being stopped by the lady's invitation to enter her home, to which she immediately accepted. Lafi, in an attempt to ask him to stop bringing them those gifts, she thanked him for taking care of Dino the other day and for having thought of them, explaining that they had nothing to offer in exchange for her. The lady, seeing that Lafi was getting up to leave, stops her by taking her by the hand. Lafi, insecure and a little scared, turns around slowly and observes her expression with spasms and somewhat disturbing on the lady's face. She was trying to smile at him. A little embarrassed, with a shy blush on her cheeks, the woman asks Lafi if she could see the baby again, to which she agrees and brings him home. With a smile on her lips and a happy and cute expression that didn't match her face, the scary-looking lady snuggled and played with Dino in her arms, happily expressing that Dino liked being with Grandma. Lafi, contemplating the particular scene, reflects that all those gifts were an attempt on her part to get closer to the child. She just wanted to see Dino. In fact, looking closely, her house was typical of an older lady. Apart from her, there was no one else. Episode 10. The fearsome woman was alone. That was the conclusion that Lafi came to. A portrait with the photograph of the woman together with a girl hung on the wall. Lafi, watching him curiously, wondered if she was her daughter, and if so, what about her husband? Deciding that it was better not to ask, as it could be a touchy subject, she inadvertently fell asleep on the sofa. Not knowing how much time had elapsed, Lafi suddenly woke up noticing the blanket that was covering her, and, in front of her on a table, a plate with cookies and a glass with a hot drink were served. This evoked a memory in Lafi's mind of a man who, in the past, had offered him a drink just like that with a smile. Pulling her out of her thoughts, the woman, with Dino asleep in her arms, he signals to Lafi that he better drink his drink before it gets cold, wearing a green harlequin cape and hat with glittering gold stars. Without prior notice, the woman tells Lafi that the girl in the photo was Grace, an incredible little girl, recognizing with a certain longing in her eyes that the time she spent with the girl had been a joy and a blessing. And she directs her gaze to Lafi and tells her that she knew how difficult it was to be a single mother. "I'm fine," Lafi states with a sincere smile on her face. The truth was that the lady was not worried about Dino, she was worried about Lafi, who reminded her of her daughter, since she saw her long ago in the forest while she was going to look at the house before renting it. They must be of contemporary ages, the woman thought. With a roar, Elle broke into the woman's house with the mop in her hands, worried that Lafi hadn't returned yet. "My name is Helga," the fearsome woman confessed, and asking them to call her Grandma Helga, she offered them that they could visit her from time to time, to which Lafi gratefully agreed. She proceeded to apologize to Helga for what happened to her daughter Grace, but was interrupted by Helga, who told her not to worry, that Grace was probably having fun with her father. She had tried to teach her self-defense techniques such as climbing with rope, iron palm, and exercises with logs, but she decided to go live with her father. She was surely fine. Lafi had been confused. She thought Grace was dead, misled by the longing expression on Helga's face when she told her about her daughter. As they said goodbye and left the house towards their home, Helga stopped Elle by grabbing him by the shoulder without Lafi noticing, and asked him if he had noticed the person who was stalking them. He didn't know who it was, but if he had, it was clear that they were probably looking for him, since he was a guardian of the Infernal Lord, telling him to be careful because he suspected that he was not just any rival, leaving Elle very surprised by the fact that Helga knew that he was an infernal guardian. While Lafi entered her house with Dino in her arms, she noticed the presence of someone strange wrapped in a cloak, standing in the room, next to a creature that she was holding on a leash. The stranger, noticing her, slowly turned to look at her. It was a skeleton. Episode 11. In a glimpse of the past, in the dining room of the Magician's Guild, Joseph gave Lafi a kind of satisfaction survey that he did to all his employees, asking him why he dedicated himself to magic. Lafi pondered the question, remembering that at first joining a warrior's team and saving the world seemed like an incredible goal. But when he finally managed to join one, he discovered that wizards were only there to add special effects to the warrior movements. Over the years, people got used to peace, and now the title no longer had the prestige it had before. She hadn't joined for that. She wanted to become a mage for that man. She thought as she recalled the image of her as a child, of her watching in awe as a hooded mage with a scepter in his hand, standing before a pile of corpses of demons that he had defeated. That was why she honed her magical skills every day, for him. Standing before the skeleton in clothes that broke into his house along with his cute pet dog, with the magic scepter in one hand and Dino in the other arm, Lafi said that surely that lick, referring to the skeleton, was after Dino, because of that whole warrior thing. And while she activated a spell with her staff, she thought that she shouldn't underestimate it, because it was said that 50 years ago there was a lick so powerful that it completely decimated the capital of Yoda's empire. Lafi was on the defensive, knowing that it was dangerous to start a battle with Dino in that place. The skeleton demon, standing with his scepter of magic, next to his fluffy and cute pet dog, very calmly he praised Lafi for his immaculate magic, ordering him to take the baby to the cradle because he needed to ask him for a favor. Very confused and bewildered by the skeleton's words, Lafi suspiciously walked past the skeleton and laid Dino down in her crib, making cute faces for him to fall asleep, while the skeleton waited patiently for her to finish. Lafi, upon returning from Dino's room, taking advantage of the skeleton's generosity, asks him to go somewhere else after all the house was rented. Calmly acceding to the woman's request, the skeleton struck her scepter against the ground, activating a matter teleportation spell, making them reappear outside the house near the forest. The skeleton, requesting to get to the point at last, an explosive attack from Lafi is interrupted, who had decided that it was better to take the advantage and attack first, shouting that she was not going to let him hurt Dino, leaving the skeleton very confused, offended that she believed him capable of hurting a child. He asked her to calm down and listen to him for a moment. To no avail, he observed her and understood something. She wouldn't stop because she was enjoying it so much. Episode 12. No matter how hard he tried, the skeleton's pleas to stop for a moment and listen to him did not reach Lafi's ears. The skeleton, he expressed that he was impressed. It was the first time he had seen such an intense explosion and of such magnitude, affirming that it had great potential. However, Lafi didn't let him finish speaking and threw the enormous sphere of fire directly at the skeleton, which, in the middle of a whirlwind of fire and intense light, completely stopped it by activating a special spell. She had chosen the wrong opponent for herself, she told him with certainty, assuring that using that magic must be exhausting for her too, reproaching him that she could have damaged the forest. Lafi, standing up, wiping the blood that was dripping from her nose due to her great effort, replied that this was something an elf would say, not a lick, assuring that she wouldn't be easily stopped, she would protect Dino at all costs. Ignoring Lafi's statement, telling him that it was time to talk, the skeleton, extending its bony hand, launched its final attack. Dark magic spell, Monday depression, to Lafi, who instantly began to feel very tired and wanting to do nothing. Collapsing to the ground, Lafi fell sitting, leaning forward on her hands, and looking at the mark on the back of her hand, she remembered the familiar commands, and loudly ordered El to go there immediately, which didn't happen. She had already used all 3 commands for the day on simple matters. While this was happening, El was inside the house wondering where Lafi was, and where the cute black fluffy dog that was in the living room had come from. Noir called the dog the skeleton, introducing himself to Lafi as Ver, the second guardian of the Infernal Lord's army, telling him to calm down, asked him for a favor to hand over El, leaving Lafi a bit confused. Later, sitting in the dining room, Ver exclaimed that he would never commit such a heinous sin as kidnapping a baby. He exclaimed, offended, which El supported by saying that Ver was a true gentleman who had taken good care of Noir, the dog. Ver, hearing that El had named his companion dog, asked him for explanations about why he had stayed in that house of his own free will. El, avoiding answering that question, headed towards a wall where the deceased warrior's sword lay on a shelf, taking it in his hands. At the same time, Ver, excited and alarmed, warns him that demons like them should not touch that sword or they would suffer unspeakable pain from its divine power. Nothing happened. He ran out of batteries, El stated with a restless laugh. The holy sword was not even charged, Ver said disappointedly. Not understanding what they were talking about, Lafi yelled and asked what they meant by charged. Of the weapons bestowed by the gods, the holy sword of thunder and the stone of the god of light must be used together, for the stone recharges the sword, Ver explained in a tone that everyone knew that. But Lafi, who didn't know, found it even more ironic that the late Guerrero didn't know either. Ver went on to explain that the stone could even be turned into a key ring for convenience. Then, he continued with the question that El and Lafi least wanted to hear, where is the warrior? Not knowing what to answer, El points down and Lafi points up, saying doubtfully there may be. Not believing his ears, Ver nervously laughed and asked if it was a joke. He asks, which was followed by a deep silence. And not taking it anymore, Ver burst into a cry of surprise at the unexpected news. Episode 13. Walking along a forest path with his dog, Ver still couldn't believe that the warrior had accidentally died. Earlier, at El and Lafi's house, El explained to Ver his plan to turn Dino into a warrior, stating that it was a great idea. However, Ver replied that it was more likely that one of the warrior's descendants would be the next warrior, but regardless of lineage, anyone could be a warrior as long as the sacred sword deems him worthy. But the main problem with Dino was that by the time the Hellord was resurrected, he would still be a child, Ver yelled. Dissatisfied with the idea, he got up and banging his fist against the table, he yelled at them that since it was possible for them to make a child fight against the Infernal Lord, that was not right. El, handing over Dino, who had freaked out from Ver's hit on Lafi, asked him if he had any better ideas. Ver blanked out, he didn't have any. Exploding, he once again hit the table with his fist and asked Lafi if he agreed to this absurd plan. She opened up by saying that she used to be afraid of the Hellord's guardians, but after meeting one and being easily fooled, she said with a sidelong glance at Elle, she nonchalantly stated that she could handle the Hellord, and besides, he had prepared various types of contracts as a method of defense. Ver, unable to believe what the duo were saying, headed for the exit door, reaffirming his disagreement with the plan, and that since there was still time, he would find another way, he said as he left the house. Back in the present time, Ver, who was walking along the forest path, was chatting with Mr. Noir, asking him if he agreed to let the boy take care of all this matter. As he raised his arm in the direction of his face, he noticed something important. His arm with his hand were not. Mr. Noir next to him was happily nibbling on his bony arm. Retrieving his limb from Mr. Noir's teeth, Ver sat on a rock by the path, aligning his arm in his place. "I think you like me too much, Mr. Noir. Is it because I'm made of bones, or do you really like me?" he asked the dog, which lay on the ground next to him, panting from the exhaustion of the trip. Looking closely at the dog, Ver realized that it had aged quite a bit, while he was still the same. Jumping up, he exclaimed in a loud voice that exercise was still very important to maintain good health, being ignored by Mr. Noir, who was deeply tired. Proceeding to rub the dog's head, he confessed to her with sincerity and some sadness that he needed a warrior, because without a warrior, he was not going to be able to die. But even so, Ver couldn't allow a child to carry that weight. Mr. Noir looked at Ver for a moment, and taking it as a sign from his companion, he asked him if he was indicating that he should look for heroes worthy of being the warrior with Verabrum, the ultra-sensitive magical detection device that he had in his castle. If he managed to find another warrior, both Dino, Elle, Lafi, and he would be happy, Ver mused aloud, congratulating Mr. Noir for having given him such a brilliant idea as he carried him with his bony hands, which with a tired face stuck out his tongue, revealing Ver's ring, which, surprised, took it and gave it to him. He promised the dog that this would be his last day of teleportation, because otherwise they would only walk so he could exercise. And without saying anything else, taking the ring between his fingers, she activated the teleportation spell, and they disappeared. Again in the house of Lafi and Elle, Ella asked the dragon how much time was left for the resurrection of the Infernal Lord, to which he answered exactly, about 11 years, 8 months and 20 days. Until now, Lafi had not worried about what seemed so far away to her, but now that she knew the exact date, so he began to doubt Elle's plan. So he asks him if he really believed that Dino could take on the Hellord. Elle confidently answers that yes, supporting himself in the fact that he had read many books while he protected the castle, and in all of them it was possible. Like in Dragon Pearl, Zapatoro fights as a child with the Piano Demon King, and in Warudo, the protagonist is a teenager when he fights against Arakamaru. The same thing happened in Huntsman x Huntsman, and in The God of the Tower. It would not have occurred to him to raise to a warrior without knowing all that before. And with a teacher as incredible as him, Dino would become a warrior in no time, Elle stated very confidently. It was comics that Elle had read, Lafi realized instantly, increasing his mistrust, thinking to herself that she had been a fool to have believed that a plan like that would work. The door to the house was flung open. Ver had arrived. Lafi, very grateful for his presence in the house, welcomes him very gladly and immediately proceeds to tell him that he was absolutely right about the plan. And while trying to tell him that how could his precious Dino be the warrior, it is interrupted by Ver's voice, who grimly and firmly declared that Elle was right, Dino was their only hope. Episode 14. Verabrum. It is a magical helmet-like item with numerous connections emerging from it, and is said to be the world's ultimate detection device. Although only Ver said so. With it, Ver was able to look into the pore of anyone in the world, if he wanted to. But it was a very difficult device to build, with 50 aubers filled with consumed lick souls, 50 high-quality magic stones, and a fragment of a meteorite that fell from the sky. Succeeding, Ver had been able to build the device a few months ago, which took him 100 years and cost him his entire fortune. Shocked and with a look of terror, Ver was standing next to a small uniformed man with large glasses, watching as his castle was demolished by huge machines. Very outraged by what they were doing to his castle, he demands an explanation from the uniformed man. This one, a little uncomfortable, explains that they had started the redevelopment work at the owner's request. That was Ver's house, and he hadn't authorized anything, so shouting furiously he asked who had taken the audacity to do it. The very nervous and astonished little man replies that the sir had not told them anything about that. They had notified them in advance that the property was undergoing redevelopment, and this left them in a very uncomfortable situation. "What, sir?" I asked, shouting, Ver already very irritated. Reviewing the list of him, the little man, he tells her that he had a very particular name, Infernal. The infernal lord was the one who had ordered all this, the little man said, surprised that Ver had not been informed by him. Shocked, Ver remembers the red envelope letter he received earlier from the infernal lord, saying that he had sent him a gift and hoped he would like it. However, he had not received anything other than the letter. So this was the gift he was referring to in the letter, Ver mused to himself. Demoralized and trembling, he asks the little man as one last plea to stop for a minute, and let him go to the east tower, to which the man agreed without problem. As he turned to give the order to Mr. Shim, one of the engineers, to stop for a minute, one of the demolition machines narrowly missed the east tower, which instantly fell to pieces. Ver's last hope was gone along with the tower, as well as all of his fortune and 100 years of his life. In the room of Lafi and Elle's house, after Ver finished explaining everything, adding that without Verebro, he wouldn't be able to find a replacement for Dino, and besides, he no longer had a home, so placing his bony hand on Elle's shoulder, he begged him to leave him, stay until they rebuilt his castle, saying he would do anything. Lafi interrupted him with her arms crossed. She clarified to Ver that she was the one who paid the rent in that house, and that Elle was the one kept there. Recalculating the situation, Ver took Dino in his hands and kneeled ostentatiously before Lafi, telling him that he had always thought that children should grow up without worries or burdens. Seeking to ingratiate himself with Lafi, since she had nowhere else to go, he managed to get a smile out of her. Worried about who he would now fight with the infernal lord, Elle shakes Ver by the shoulder looking for him to answer her question, to which he irresponsibly responds in a solemn tone, "Whatever happens." Lafi had allowed Ver to stay on the second floor of the house for now, and thus the number of maintained, or rather family members, became 2. A few days later, while they were all gathered on the floor around Dino, who was wearing cute rabbit pajamas, they competed to see which word Dino said first. "Rest," Lafi said. "Dad," Elle contradicted, and even Ver, who had only been living with them for a few days, blushingly offered that Dino call him uncle. The little boy, very smiling and playful, began to say "Ma," causing the emotion of Lafi and the fury of Elle. "Grandma," he finished saying Dino, and that's how Grandma Helga suddenly appeared with her usual impressive air, moved by Dino's first word, and, with tears in her eyes, she picked up the little one and began to rock him and make cute faces at him. "Yes, of course," he said. Grandmother, Elle and Lafi agreed with little eagerness when they observed the scene, with an expression that this was not true on their faces. Helga, upon noticing the presence of someone strange trying to sneak away, she stopped and slowly turning around asked who was the skeleton with the hole in her coat. Ver recognized the woman of the woods who had struck him with an arrow that, had he not been a skeleton, would have pierced his heart, and he wondered with concern how he would save himself from that ruthless woman. In an instant Lafi appeared in front of Ver in his defense, quickly explaining to Helga, who was the second guardian of the infernal lord, had been left homeless and would be living with them for a while. Helga asks them, who was looking after the Hellord's castle then, if 2 of her guardians were there, not because she was worried about the Hellord, but she was worried that they would be a bad influence on Dino. Comment that Ver reproached by clarifying that, although he was a guardian, he wanted Dino to live the life he wanted. Upset by the comment, Elle desperately asks who could kill him if not Dino, to which a hysterical Ver counters by saying that Dino couldn't be a warrior because he was too dangerous, getting into a heated discussion on the subject. Helga, observing the deplorable scene among the guardians, reminds them that whether Dino is a warrior or not depends on them. It depends on Dino himself. Episode 15. In the house in the woods, Lafi's voice was heard saying goodbye to Elle as she left for his work. After she left her Elle from her, who had been seeing her off with a kind smile, she changed her expression to one of loose suspicion. With an evil smile she turned to Dino, approaching firmly and slowly towards him. Although Elle understood that Dino had to choose his own future, as he rocked Dino Hellfire style and Blue Dragon burp bubbles at him, he decided to take advantage of the fact that Lafi was working by leaving him alone with Dino, because no matter what, he was going to making Dad be Dino's first word. Elle said cunningly, thinking aloud, completely ignoring Ver, who was sitting behind him next to Mr. Noir watching such a scene, telling him that he was there too. Elle gave him a look telling them that they weren't much of a match for him and continued making faces at Dino in his attempt to get him to say Dad, failing miserably. In the break room of the Mages Guild, Joseph congratulates Lafi on her excellent job today as they put on their shoes to go home to her. Grateful for his words, Lafi takes the opportunity to ask her teacher, remembering that he told her that he had a little daughter named Jane, what had been the first one she had pronounced, if Dad or Mama, with a deep threatening look on his face, to which Joseph responds by saying that babies usually say Mommy first. A little unsettled by Lafi's look, she is relieved. She changes to a tender expression and tears, calming down a bit. Even though my daughter said dad first, the wizard continued to say proudly, claiming that all children love a father who plays with them. She fell into despair, Lafi deeply hurt. She couldn't help but shed a few tears while she reproached herself that she worked all the time while Elle was with Dino all day, and creating mental scenes with a teenage Dino in diapers reproaching her for the fact that she had never been there for him, that she only talked about money when all he wanted was her love, breaking her mother's heart when she decided to defy her and converted in a warrior, leaving with Elle to face the infernal lord. Lafi wasn't going to let Elle steal Dino from her. She determined herself, and with the same menacing aura as Ates, she tells Joseph that she would take every vacation day she had. Surprised and disturbed by Lafi's sudden declaration, Joseph tells her that it didn't matter what the baby said first, because every child needed its mother. That's how it had been on Jane's first birthday. She didn't sit still or want cake, she wanted to her mom, adding that she couldn't give her a vacation. But before she finished speaking, Lafi stopped abruptly, interrupting him, and slowly turning to look at Joseph with a menacing aura, she asks him what he said. Confused and fearful, the magician repeats that he couldn't give her a vacation. Lafi tells him that it wasn't birthday party, Joseph asked, making Lafi completely shocked. She had forgotten Dino's first birthday.